Tonight, Israel responds with force after its Prime Minister says his home was targeted in a drone attack. Good evening, I'm Isabella Tolhurst. This is ABC News Northern Territory. Also tonight, how the potential for war in the Middle East is swaying voters in the upcoming US election. The King steps out to meet the public in Sydney for the first time as sovereign. And Age is No Limit, a celebration of sport for the over 30s, wraps up in Alice Springs. Dozens of people have been killed and more are thought to be trapped under rubble following an Israeli airstrike in northern Gaza. Hamas-run authorities say 73 people died in the attack on Beit Lahia, but Israel disputes that. Details are emerging slowly because Israel has restricted media access to the area. The news comes as Israeli forces continue to attack Hezbollah targets in Beirut.
The Israeli army strikes buildings in Beirut, not long after what it says was an attempted attack on Israel's leader.
This morning, 3 drones infiltrated from Lebanon. 2 of them were intercepted and a third hit a structure in Caesarea as an attempt to target the Prime Minister.
He wasn't at home at the time and there were no casualties, but Mr Netanyahu is clear about who he thinks is to blame, posting on social media, "The attempt by Iran's proxy, Hezbollah, to assassinate me and my wife today was a grave mistake." It came as Israel declassified more footage of Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar, these shots showing him and his family in underground tunnels the day before the October 7th attacks last year, and this the moment he was killed by Israeli forces in Gaza. There had been hopes, particularly those voiced by Western leaders, that the killing of Yahya Sinwar would be an opportunity for Israel to end its conflicts in Gaza and Lebanon. But the prospect of a ceasefire seems increasingly unrealistic, with Israel, Hamas and Hezbollah continuing to fight on.
The numbers of civilian casualties have been far too high. We'd like to see Israel scale back on some of the strikes that it's taking, especially in and around Beirut.
In Gaza, the destruction continues. This house in a refugee camp reduced to rubble. Local media saying a whole family of 11 died here.
Why this crime? Why this hatred? Why are these massacres being committed against the sleeping and unarmed civilians?
And as Israel and Hamas vow to fight on, many are left asking, when will this war end? Matthew Doran, ABC News, Jerusalem.
Michigan is considered a must-win state for Kamala Harris if she's to take the White House in next month's presidential election. But the situation in the Middle East is threatening her support among a key constituency in the Midwestern battleground, Arab Americans. The widening of the conflict in Lebanon has been the final straw for some in the community. North America correspondent Barbara Miller is in Dearborn, Michigan.
On the outskirts of Detroit, America's first Arab-majority city. A proud community built up around the jobs migrants from the Middle East found in the auto industry. But today in Dearborn, they're hurting.
It's tearing us apart.
As Israel strikes Lebanon, Sam Hamoud is desperately worried about family back home.
I'm talking about my village, my people, my cousins. My old man has been running all over the country trying to find a safe place to stay.
Addressing on the side, I guess.
Gotcha.
Sam Hamoud backed Donald Trump in 2016 and 2020, but this time he might not vote at all.
This is 2 administrations that just want to pound bombs, and they're all U.S.-made bombs. And I feel like I'm in this whole situation because they're using our tax dollars.
In Michigan's Democratic primary election, more than 100,000 people voted uncommitted in protest at the Biden administration's staunch support of Israel. No, no, no! And in the final weeks of campaigning, some have gone further.
Assalamualaikum, sister.
The Abandon Harris campaign endorsing Green Party candidate Jill Stein, who's called for a ceasefire in Gaza and an end to military aid to Israel.
We have to register our protest. We cannot be silent. We want to punish this administration, the Harris-Biden administration, for committing genocide. If Trump wins, so what is it he's going to do that we have not seen already?
Jill Stein is polling at around 1%, but that's enough to worry the Democrats.
Third-party votes in the United States, it's unfortunate, but they have the potential to be spoiler candidates.
Democrats blame Jill Stein for robbing them of victory when she took votes in key swing states in 2016, and they're now targeting her.
She's not sorry she helped Trump win. That's why a vote for Stein is really a vote for Trump.
Well, we actually say bring it on, because every time they try to smear us, they produce a huge counter-reaction.
Jill Stein makes no excuses for drawing votes from the main parties.
For the most part, people are not supporting that candidate. They're voting against the candidate that they hate the most. This is not what democracy needs.
It's a vote for Jill Stein. It's not a vote for Trump, and it's not a vote for the Democrats.
Sujud Hamadi is a Dearborn lawyer. She was a long-term Democratic voter, but this time she'll be backing Jill Stein.
If they want our vote, then they need to do what it takes to garner our vote instead of pushing our backs up against the wall and telling us to vote for the lesser of two evils.
We love this place.
With polls neck and neck, both Donald Trump and Kamala Harris are making multiple campaign stops in Michigan.
It's a significant concern, I think, for the Harris campaign. If they can limit the damage and turn up the heat on the African-American turnout, maybe that's enough, right? But Trump is doing the same thing in other parts of the state with other constituencies.
Donald Trump caused an upset when he took Michigan in 2016 by 11,000 votes. Now, Joe Biden won it back for the Democrats in 2020 with 154,000 votes. And it just shows you how small shifts in a community like this one could determine who wins the White House. In a race that once again is down to the wire. Barbara Miller, ABC News, Dearborn, Michigan.
King Charles and Queen Camilla have greeted cheering crowds on their first day of public engagements in Sydney. It's the King's 17th visit to Australia, but his first as head of state. He came bearing a gift for the nation's oldest parliament, praising the power of representative democracy.
The King and Queen started their Sunday in Sydney at church. With a song and a signature, their Majesties were off, greeting locals.
When I realised that the King and Queen were just in my neighbourhood, I couldn't resist coming down to see them.
I welcome them to Sydney, and I wish the King all the very best for his cancer treatment. And he said, "Thank you very much, I really appreciate your wishes."
Excited fans from across the country waited for a chance to meet the King.
G'day, you've actually greetings from Tasmania.
Some were already pen pals.
Billy was lucky enough to receive a letter in response to one he wrote to the King a little while ago.
The King's next stop was the familiar steps of the New South Wales Parliament. He visited in 1974 as Prince of Wales.
Greeting His Royal Highness is the President of the Legislative Council and the Speaker of the Assembly.
On the 150th anniversary of the Upper House.
I should remind you that in company with convicts, lunatics and peers of the realm, I am ineligible to vote.
With a fanfare, he entered for the first time as sovereign.
Please join me in welcoming His Majesty the King.
For an event celebrating the bicentenary of the Legislative Council, Australia's oldest legislative body.
Incidentally, I first came to Australia nearly 60 years ago, which is slightly worrying.
He presented a gift to the Parliament.
It is, in fact, an hourglass, a speech timer.
His sense of humour unchanged. And within 15 minutes, he was gone.
The King didn't stay for lunch, but no doubt His Majesty would have given guests plenty to talk about. Attendees included parliamentarians from across the political spectrum.
The King missed out on a menu including octopus, duck and macaroons to receive the Governor-General, Sam Mostyn, and Governor of New South Wales, Margaret Beazley, as he prepares for a busy day in the nation's capital tomorrow. Alexander Lewis, ABC News.
A new political era in Indonesia has begun as Prabowo Subianto is sworn in as president. The 73-year-old takes the helm of Southeast Asia's largest nation, pledging to make it an economic powerhouse. From Jakarta, here's Indonesia correspondent Bill Birtles.
Akan memenuhi kewajiban Presiden Republik Indonesia.
This moment was decades in the making. Prabowo Subianto has long sought the country's top job. Now this blue blood of Indonesian political and military circles has promised to rule for the country's most vulnerable.
Kita harus mengerti selalu.
A free nation is a nation where the people are free. People need to be free from fear, poverty, hunger, lack of education, oppression and suffering.
The former general was ousted from the military once over brutal tactics against opponents of his then father-in-law, the dictator Suharto. Prabowo was later reborn as a perennial presidential candidate. With the backing of his former rival, the popular outgoing president Joko Widodo, he won a landslide election victory earlier this year. He's expected to have a bigger voice on the world stage than his predecessor.
We have to show solidarity. We must defend all the oppressed people in the world. That's why we support freedom for Palestinians.
The beginning of the Prabowo era marks the end of a decade of Joko Widodo, but the outgoing leader won't be far from the centre of power. His son, Gibran Rakabuming Raka, is the new vice president. At 37, he's seen as a sign of continuity and a symbol of how his father will continue to have influence behind the scenes. Bill Birtles, ABC News, Jakarta.
Heavy rain has lashed the Italian island of Sicily, causing flooding and widespread damage. Emergency workers rescued residents who had climbed to safety on their roofs after the Salso River burst its banks. The island has been in the grip of a months-long drought. Carbon credits are supposed to offset emissions released into the atmosphere. Alan Kohler takes a look at what the data says about how they're working.
There's a bit more than 2 trillion tonnes of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, normally expressed as parts per million. That's about 700 billion tonnes more than 200 years ago, and that's what's dangerously heating the planet. And this is roughly what a tonne of carbon dioxide looks like. Now, one way we're dealing with this problem is by paying people to get it out of the atmosphere. And the system for achieving that is by giving them a certificate for every tonne of CO2 that they're responsible for removing. And they can sell that on the market. These are also called offsets.
Right now, you can get $37 for one of those certificates on the Australian market.
That transaction is really the basis of Australia's plan to reduce carbon dioxide emissions to 43% of 2005 levels by 2030 and net zero by 2050.
The companies that do most of the emitting are supposed to reduce their emissions, but they can't. So they're allowed to buy those offsets instead. Most of them come from something called human-induced regeneration, which means land management to help native forests regrow and soak up carbon dioxide, as long as they wouldn't have grown anyway.
But some researchers at ANU and the University of New South Wales have published the following graph in a paper debunking the whole system.
The vertical green bar is when 75% of the human-induced regeneration projects were registered. The line is the amount of forest cover in the areas covered by the scheme. It's increased, so some carbon dioxide is out of the atmosphere, but not much. And anyway, it was increasing before the humans that are inducing the regeneration started earning their certificates.
In fact, there's a global controversy about the integrity of offsets. Someone in the United States has just been charged with fraud for selling fake offsets. It's an argument that's not going to go away, and it's central to the whole project of dealing with climate change. Maybe we'll just have to, I don't know, reduce emissions.
The ACT's longest-serving Chief Minister, Andrew Barr, has led Labor to a historic 7th term in government. Early in last night's vote count, it appeared the Canberra Liberals may have done enough to end Labor's 23 years in power. But it soon became clear Labor would retain its 10 seats. And although the Greens lost 3 seats, including those of 2 ministers, they held enough ground to open the way for another Labor-Greens coalition government. 2 independent candidates are also set to join the Legislative Assembly, including former David Pocock staffer Thomas Emerson.
There's a little bit of counting to go, but it does look that the crossbench will be 5 people who hold progressive values and whose natural partner would be a Labor government.
They certainly have cemented themselves in the history books as they embark perhaps on another coalition government.
A podcast putting people with disability behind the microphone has been downloaded millions of times. The Listenable Podcast is hosted by 2 mates who are bringing their stories to life while breaking down the barriers to accessibility.
It's a golden touch on traditional podcasting.
Welcome to the Listenable Podcast. Welcome back to the studio.
Fresh from the Paris Games, Paralympic medalist Rowan Crothers is the special guest on the Listenable Podcast.
The table in front of us adorned with multiple bronze, silver and gold medals across.
It's recorded at the disability-friendly podcast studio Session in Progress, featuring adjustable microphone stands and level flooring for better navigation.
And we're trying to create spaces that make people not have to think about their access needs.
It's challenging common misconceptions about what life is like with a disability.
So many people with disability across multiple industries have so much wisdom to share, but they just have never had that opportunity.
I said to Dill, what is it like for someone who's blind? And he said, you should go ask them. And I was like, oh. He's like, I'm in a wheelchair. I don't know. He says, my favourite line is, I'm not the Dalai Lama of disability. And that really resonated with me. And I said, well, let's go find out. And that's how the podcast started.
The show has over 2 million downloads and has featured people with all types of disabilities.
I have a disability called cerebral palsy, and it is a kind of brain damage that impairs my motor control and coordination and fine motor skills.
Rowan says accessible spaces have come a long way since he took an interest in Paris swimming as a boy.
I didn't think I had the opportunities to be successful in life.
Over 5.5 million Australians said they had a disability at the last Australian census, and spaces like Session in Progress are helping to set a new benchmark when it comes to accessibility.
It's a podcast for everyone, not just people with disabilities.
It's a simple yet powerful move in the right direction. Costa Haratos, ABC News.
A treatment for spinal cord injuries has so far eluded medical researchers. Now, Australian scientists are embarking on a landmark clinical trial using unique nasal cells. They hope it'll one day transform the lives of patients.
Joseph Pernew was a talented rugby league player with a bright future.
All the way, Joe!
Known as Big Joe, the teenager had been signed by the Titans. But last year, his life changed in an instant.
I was playing footy and collided with a goalpost, so yeah.
His spinal cord was severed, the catastrophic injury keeping him in hospital for 11 months.
Getting the news that I may not be able to move or walk again, it's obviously the greatest news to hear.
The now 18-year-old came home just in time for his school formal. He's patiently working to regain some function.
Nice, brother.
It's individuals like Joe these Queensland scientists want to help. Decades of groundwork has led to a Phase 1 clinical trial. They're using a patient's own olfactory cells to grow nerve bridges, which are transplanted into their injured spinal cord.
The olfactory and sheathing cells have very special properties. The olfactory nerve is the only nerve in our body that regenerates every day as part of its normal function.
Alongside physical rehabilitation, it's hoped the therapy will improve sensory, motor, bowel and bladder function.
It gives them more independence, less carer support, and they can get back to jobs or to education or to get out into the community more easily.
It can seem small, but for us it means the world and can make a major difference in our lives.
30 participants will be recruited from Brisbane, Sydney and Melbourne. Some people have even moved here from overseas in the hope they'll be accepted. While the trial is only in its infancy and will need more funding, it's a cause for optimism.
Baby steps.
Emma Pollard, ABC News, Brisbane.
Geelong has stunned the reigning AFLW premiers, putting a dent in Brisbane's top two chances. Adelaide's jumped the Lions into third spot after their win over Collingwood, and North Melbourne remains unbeaten, smashing Essendon at Windy Hill.
Geelong has shown glimpses of greatness in 2024, but not many expected them to topple the top four Lions, as they became the first team to kick 3 first-quarter goals against Brisbane this year. The Lions lost Dakota Davidson to concussion after taking a knock on the turf in a marking contest. Michaela Bowen making a moment of confusion work to her advantage. The Cats up by 17 with a quarter to play.
She confused herself, then she confused Bolts, and then she kicks the most unlikely of goals.
Brisbane challenged late, but Geelong held off the charge to keep its finals hopes alive, but only just.
And kicks the goal. Massive for the Cats.
A burst water pipe almost caused a delay ahead of Collingwood's clash against Adelaide. Both sides going hard for the footy early, Chelsea Randall and Eliza James meeting head-on on the wing.
Big collision coming up!
After a tight first half, the Crows kicked away in a low-scoring contest.
And the kicks towards goal and it's just dribbled through!
The win moves them up to third spot on the ladder. A top two finish still within reach. North Melbourne's unbeaten season continues, smashing the Bombers by 51 points at Windy Hill.
Vicky Wall, left foot, 35 metres out. Magnificent!
The Kangaroos kept Essendon goalless in the first half and now jump back to the top of the ladder. And last night, Fremantle won its 7th consecutive Western Derby, overpowering the Eagles early to set up a 23-point win. Cameron Slesser, ABC News.
Spain's Marc Marquez has claimed a remarkable come-from-behind victory at the Phillip Island Moto GP. Australian Jack Miller finished in 11th place as the Spanish riders once again dominated on the track.
Blue skies greeted riders and fans on Phillip Island, and the stars were out too.
We've got perfect conditions, not too much wind, so many riders in contention. I'm hoping Jorge can take it out from the front.
Championship leader Jorge Martin had pole position, and a shaky start from rival Marc Marquez
Huge wheel spin.
helped him take the early lead.
But an awful start for Marquez.
The replay revealing a visor tear-off to be the culprit.
He was stuck under his rear tyre, and that was why he just didn't get the purchase, because his rear tyre wasn't sat on tarmac.
While Martin was happily out in front, Marquez had to pick his way through the field, eventually catching up with the leader, and a cat-and-mouse battle ensued.
This has been an absolutely awesome ride by Jorge Martin.
With 4 laps left, Marquez made his move. Martin soon snatched it back.
What a showdown we have in store.
But Marquez wasn't done with yet.
Forces Martin to give way.
And 3 laps later, the checkered flag was in sight.
An incredible finish to the Australian Grand Prix. Marc Marquez brings the thunder down under.
A show of sportsmanship between the duelling riders before the celebrations began. The 8-time world champion claiming his 4th Phillip Island title after the disastrous start.
I saw it. I tried to remove, but it was impossible. And in fact, when I released the clutch, I started to spin. In the beginning, I was a bit stressful, but super happy for the victory.
The usual fanfare followed by an Australian tradition, capping off a victory to remember. Erin Marsico-Vettere, ABC News.
In netball, the Australian Diamonds have lost the opening game of the Constellation Cup against the New Zealand Silver Ferns in Wellington this evening. The home side was clinical in the 14-goal win, its 7th straight against Australia on home soil.
Australia's biggest challenge became immediately obvious, trying to shut down 193-centimetre tall goal shooter Grace Nowicki.
2 on the board as quick as you like.
Her 96% shooting accuracy in the first half had the world #1 side in shambles, and New Zealand's stellar second quarter saw them take a 9-goal lead into half-time. It was an improved third quarter for the Diamonds, who narrowed the deficit, but the Silver Ferns closed out the game, taking the 64-50 win, their biggest against Australia in 14 years.
They continue their dominance at home with yet another win.
Yeah, they obviously played extremely well, and we didn't, to be honest, so lots to learn from that game, and obviously 3 to go, so we're really looking for a better performance the next time.
Earlier this afternoon, the Australian Kelpies thrashed New Zealand by 50 goals in the first game of the Trans-Tasman Cup. The Kelpies were dominant from the beginning and extended a 9-point quarter-time lead to 23 at the big break. Jerome Gilbard and Brodie Roberts showed their experience as a combination before being replaced by a whole new attacking line which continued to fire.
Stunning play from the Kelpies.
And their defence was just as clinical. The Kelpies finished 84-34 victors.
We've been building connections for a long time. Lots of us have been in this program for 3 years, and then to get out here today, we just put it all into practice, which is exactly what we wanted.
The second game of the 4-match series will be played in Auckland on Wednesday. Anthea Moody, ABC News.
After a 6-year hiatus, Australia's first and longest-running Masters Games has returned to Alice Springs. The week-long sporting event is targeted at the over-30s and has drawn hundreds of sports enthusiasts from around the country to the Red Centre.
After 6 years, the Masters Games sprinting back into Alice Springs.
Like we felt, oh, the Masters are back. There's just magic in the air.
Australia's longest-running Masters event is open to everyone over the minimum age, 30 for most sports.
When you're good at sports or ordinary, there's so many things you can do.
It's been a record-breaking week for some, including local legend Debbie Page, who competed in 14 events, breaking 2 records in road walking.
And it just shows that, you know, we can have these little personal goals at any age.
But while there's been wins for some, the games themselves have suffered a poor turnout. Multiple sports dropped in the lead-up, with participant numbers a third of what they were 6 years ago. Competitors claiming cost of living pressures and soaring airfares are a key issue. But it hasn't dissuaded Raymond Marr, who's competed in every Masters game since 1986.
I hope to keep going as long as I can.
At 87, he's one of this year's oldest participants and the only competitor in his age group.
Later on, when the medals come out, well, there's probably been only one in there might fluke a medal there.
Organisers say it's been a success but wouldn't commit to the event's future.
We consult with our stakeholders, with community groups, and we will do that same process for the Alice Springs Masters Games.
Participants hopeful it'll come back stronger in 2026.
We need something to focus on that's really uplifting and positive.
Hopefully I'll see how I go and try and keep fit enough to have another hit.
So it's game, set and match for this year's Masters, with hopes the event will return in the years to come. Charmaine Allison, ABC News, Alice Springs.
Time to take a look at the weather, starting with this photo from Shayla Gamble of Casuarina Beach. Showers and storms today north of Elliot and in the Tanami district, while it was hot and sunny in the south. It was 35 in Darwin today, 37 in Batchelor and 37 degrees in Jabiru. Zooming out, Katherine reached 38 degrees, Nhulunbuy 34 and Borroloola 39. Further south, Tennant Creek reached a high of 37, Alice Springs 36. On the satellite, broad cloud is moving over southwest WA, while a low pressure system brings cloud to New South Wales's coast. The NT is peppered with thunderstorms, but not heavy cloud coverage. A low pressure trough curves across the NT in Queensland, while a high near Tasmania keeps skies relatively clear in the southeast. A cold front is crossing WA, bringing rain. Interstate tomorrow, mostly sunny in Brisbane, a top of 28. Showers for Sydney, 21 degrees. Canberra, sunny and 24, mostly sunny in Melbourne, 25. Hobart's 22, Adelaide mostly clear and 30, and Perth partly cloudy, a top of 20. Around the Territory tomorrow, sunny in the centre, 37 in Alice Springs, 39 degrees in Yulara and 38 in Tennant Creek. Further north, 38 degrees in Katherine, 39 in Mataranka, 33 in Nhulunbuy and 41 in Borroloola. And in the west, storms and showers about, 34 in Darwin, 38 in Jabiru, 36 in Batchelor. There's a 3-day heatwave warning in place for the top end, growing more severe in coming days. The Tiwi Islands could reach extreme levels. The morning high tide will be at 7:35 tomorrow, and winds will reach up to 10 knots off Darwin. The sun will rise tomorrow at 6:17 and set at 6:45. And taking a look at the week ahead, stormy in Darwin tomorrow with the potential for showers continuing continuing throughout the week, while in Alice Springs, a sunny and hot next few days before temperatures drop to the low 30s from Thursday. And that's ABC News for this Sunday night. Thanks for your company. Good night.